Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz Interview Series with veteran jazz saxophonist Dave Goldberg. We dig into his newest 2023 CD, The Other Side, a trio with organist Joe Bagg and drummer Adam Nussbaum. We also get into his life of jazz, stellar live shows he's caught, what he teaches the youth, and so much more. Enjoy.
Hey, thanks for taking a minute out for the show. I appreciate it.
Sure.
So before we get into The Other Side, what I'd like to know is, how did you survive the last 3 years with COVID? You know, it did its thing on the musicians in the community. How did you get through it, and how good does it feel to have an album out now?
Yeah, COVID was interesting for jazz musicians because, our music, we need to relate to other musicians in a live setting. And without that, it's, I don't know, you start to feel a little bit lost, So I think pretty much we all kind of dealt with that. You saw a lot of people trying to do stuff over Zoom, but it was also a time for creativity for a lot of people, and that could almost become overwhelming too, because I'd be on social media and this person's writing a symphony and this person's writing big band charts, and then something becomes overwhelming of I got to do some big project while I have all this time on my hands, and so I found myself kind of more reflecting back into, why I fell in love with this music in the beginning, when I was in my teens and early 20s. And I just spent a lot of time actually going back and listening to all the old albums I love and playing along with them. And then there was that kind of helped me through it, man. It felt like I was a part of this big lineage of all the great musicians. And so I spent a lot of time just playing standards, actually. And I did some writing, but like I said, I kind of found that a little bit heavy, just in terms of this pressure to produce some major work at the end of the other side of this, which kind of led me to the title of, everything was, when we get on the other side of this, we'll do blah, 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 And family-wise, I was pretty cool. I mean, I got a lot of time to spend with my daughter, who was starting ninth grade. So that's kind of cool because, there's at that age, usually teens are kind of pulling away, and we spent a lot of quality time. So I was lucky that I wasn't isolated from that point of view. I know a lot of musicians who were really by themselves, and that was tough. But so spent a lot of time practicing. We released some solo videos of me playing through some tunes, and which was really regular at one point, and then I was just all right, I'm kind of bored of doing that. But it was a lot of introspection, which I'm sure a lot of musicians, that's probably how they'd answer that question. And then when they do get on the other side of it, you're seeing lots of work, out there now. Everything from solo works to, there's all this music available, which is great.
So talk to me a little bit about, you kind of touched on how you constructed this project, but kind of get into it a little bit more, how it all came together, and just overall, kind of what's the reception been? Yeah,
so I'm from South Florida originally, and I moved out to Los Angeles about 20 years ago. One of the first musicians I met out here was an organ player named Joe Bagg, and first time I met him, he was lugging a Hammond B3 up a flight of stairs just to do a $75 gig, and I thought, okay, I've moved to the right place. This is these are great musicians that are really hungry to play. They want to play, and anyway, he's a fabulous musician, and so I had recorded with him, and I've also recorded with Adam Nussbaum earlier, and like I said, I was spent a lot of those few years during COVID listening to albums that I really fell in love with, and during the 90s, I listened to an album. There was a Jerry Bergonzi record. There's actually four of them, I think, with Dan Wall on organ and Adam Nussbaum on drums. And so I was going back and listening to that and playing along with it. And I thought, maybe that's what I just want to do. I just want to play some of my originals with that same kind of, vibe. So I called up Adam, and he'd never played with Joe Bagg before, but I really like putting musicians together who I know are going to work well. For the first time, you put them together in the studio. We did do one little quick rehearsal, but for the most part, you put two great musicians together, and it's going to work out. And you get kind of a really great creative energy that you can capture. That first moment when everyone plays and everyone looks around and goes, yeah, this is going to be great, So yeah, it was fun to work with both of them. Most of the tunes are originals. I did one cover of Danny Boy, which I did a reharmonization of. That was interesting. Yeah, and I've been getting a pretty good response with it. I mean, most of my writing, to me, melody is very important. So I think people can kind of listen to it the first time and get it right away. It's not something that takes several listens to process, but of course with, those great musicians, there's plenty to dig into in terms of how they're going about, navigating the compositions.
So talk to me a little bit about how this journey into being a musician began for you and some early jazz influences.
Yeah, so I grew up in South Florida. There was always music in the house going on, mostly classical. My stepfather was really into like Dixieland, New Orleans jazz. And my first teacher was an older teacher, and he was kind of from the big band era. So from then I kind of got like a nice foundation of here's Louis Armstrong, and here's like Benny Carter and Johnny Hodges, But being a kid, obviously I was drawn to like newer players as well, and at that point, listening to like pop music in the mid '80s, like it wasn't that hard to make a jump to like fusion groups like Spyro Gyra and or like I was into David Sanborn, all the popular guys at that point. And then there was a kid who lived down the street from me who's about 4 years older than me, a fabulous saxophone player named Joel Siegel. And, me looking up to him being like finishing high school while I was kind of in middle school, he handed me like a Miles Davis record of Round About Midnight. And I remember just staring at the cover and just being mesmerized by this guy. He just looks so cool with his glasses and just has a vibe to it. And of course you hear the first note is his trumpet on Round About Midnight, man. It's just amazing. So yeah, and then I was kind of hooked, and I started working backwards, It was like, all right, I just see who Coltrane is and who Miles is and who Bird is, and then it all opened up from there.
So what was the first live jazz show that blew you away?
Well, I definitely saw Michael Brecker in like '87 on his first tour, and Adam Nussbaum was actually playing on that, so which is kind of interesting for it to come full circle to be playing with somebody who played with one of my heroes,
Yeah.
I did get a chance to see Miles. That was pretty cool. I saw Dizzy Gillespie, so I've been kind of lucky where I got to see a lot of the masters, and that's always been important to me. Just like this last week, I made sure I went to the Hollywood Bowl. Herbie Hancock was there. With Ron Carter, and it was like a whole bunch of people doing a tribute to Wayne Shorter, and I dragged a bunch of my students. I'm like, no, you got to go see Herbie. You'll thank me later. So yeah, again, the connection to the history is pretty amazing.
It sure is. Yeah. Yeah. Well, what is in this process of being an educator and a recording artist and a live performer? What is it that you like the best about being a professional musician?
Just always playing with other new musicians and being able to, try to impart that passion on my students. I teach mostly privately, and a lot of the kids are kind of like middle school to high school age, and I get a few that stay on after college, and a few adults, but I can really relate to how it was for me back then, having kind of a mentor going, hey, check this album out, and here's what you need to listen to off of this record. Because a lot of times we'll say, go listen to Kind of Blue. And the kid's like, oh, okay. But, you need to be specific. Like, here's what you should check out on Kind of Blue and why this is important. Or listen to how, each of their solos are completely different, even though it's the same material, Little things like that I think that sometimes, beginning listeners don't really, or musicians don't really understand. They're just kind of listening overall, but they're not doing active listening, like what's happening, where are they on the form. When you can point things out like that, you see the lights go on, like, oh, wow, there's a lot to this music, more than just, something in the background, that there's really a conversation going on.
So why do you love jazz?
It's one of it's probably the only music where you can get four musicians that never met each other. And as long as everybody's competent on their instrument and you know what tune you're going to do, to play together, and it can sound amazing from the very first note. That's pretty unusual. I mean, you know, unfortunately in the working world, a lot of times we're doing gigs with guys that we maybe never played with before, or once or twice, or, you know, and we'll have like a great set, and people come and like, oh, you guys are great. Like, how long have you been playing together? Or, you know, it'll be like, I don't know, like an hour. And they think we're joking, and it's like, no, that's true. You know, we just, you know, we've never met before or whatever. And you get all different ages too. I think that's beautiful, man. You got, you know, when I was younger, I always made sure that if I could, I tried to get an older, more experienced musician on the gig. Because again, you're tying into, you know, stories and history. And not just verbal, just listening. Like when you hear someone play something a certain way, it's like, oh yeah, I get it. You know, it doesn't even have to be talked about. And sometimes when you get like younger musicians who only play with the same age, I think they lose out on that kind of lineage and that connection, you know.
So speaking of being a veteran musician and the younger musicians, what is it, now you're at that point, you've been around enough, you've been a seasoned musician, what do you try to teach young players that you get around or your students?
You know, a lot about what I was just talking about, like a lot of times like active listening, you know, especially as a horn player, you know, just like when you're not playing, there's so much going on and you need to be mentally involved with the music. So there's like a lot you can do actually without the instrument in your hands. Sometimes you'll get guys who are always like practice, and they'll practice 6 hours, 8 hours a day, you know. And then I once hung out with Branford Marsalis and I asked him what advice he had. He goes, don't practice too much. And I kind of laughed it off, but like now I understand what he's saying. Like you have to hold back just a little bit, and there's a lot of experience in the world that you can tell through your music. But also you can do a lot, you want to do a mental preparation, just listening to music actively, not as some stuff on the background, you know, just listening how musicians respond to each other. Yeah, so I try to impart that. I mean, obviously, like, we all need the basics, you know, so, like, it all starts with, like, you got to play your instrument. There's really never been a jazz musician alive who couldn't play the heck out of their instrument. I mean, they're all virtuosos, even if they choose not to use it. I mean, Count Basie, you know, like, played very simple, but that guy could play the piano, seriously. So, you know, it was a choice, you know. Yeah, so we talk about a lot of stuff like that.
So if anyone out there wants to pick up the brand new album on the other side, where's the best place to go? And for any live shows or anything that you've done previously, any previous work, where should they go?
Yeah, well, you know, so it's streaming pretty much on, you know, everywhere. I mean, I do have physical copies. If anyone wants a physical copy, you're welcome to go to my website, davegoldberg.com, and I'll be happy to get one in your hands for sure. You know, I do answer emails through there. Yeah, just social media. You know, I post when I'm playing here and there, and things that are going on.
Cool, Dave. This has been great. Thank you for opening up about the project. I've loved the album. I'm looking forward to spinning it on the show. So thank you for opening up. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you for taking time to you know, to reach out and checking out new music and stuff. Because I also I tend to talk about that a lot too. You know, that you know, something called time equity, and we're competing against the entire history of the music all the time. Like on our phones, we have the whole library of jazz right there. So to get someone to take the time to, you know, hit your music and check it out, that means something. So thank you.
Thanks for listening and tuning into another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players and minds in New York City, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to Dave for his time, energy, and cool. If you want to hear more Neon Jazz interviews, you can find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Subscribe to us at YouTube, and for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.